At 19, Hannah Mitchell feels every pitying glance or poorly disguised look of disinterest as she adjusts herself in a chair in the small waiting room of XYZ Company. The accident had left marks not only on her body, with her legs partially paralyzed, but also on her soul, weary from so many closed doors. The crutches next to the chair are her constant companions, and she adjusts them subconsciously, trying to alleviate some of the nervousness consuming her. Inside the administration room, Natalie Wright watches Hannah through the glass window. The clock on the wall ticks slowly, but Natalie's heart beats fast, driven by a mix of compassion and admiration. She only knows Hannah's story superficially, through murmurs and the resume that landed on her desk a week ago. She has lost so much, yet she is still trying, Natalie thinks, feeling a pang of responsibility. Turning back to her desk, Natalie shuffles papers, but her mind is on the young woman on the other side of the glass. She stands up, determined, and walks to her boss's door. Knocking, she quickly rehearses what she will say, knowing each word could be decisive for Hannah. "Come in," the voice of Michael Richardson, the director, sounds through the door. Natalie enters, takes a deep breath, and begins, "Michael, I know we have our reservations about hiring right now, but I would like to discuss Hannah Mitchell's case. She's out there, waiting." Michael, a middle-aged man with a perpetually serious expression, looks over his glasses. "Natalie, you know her situation is not ideal. How will she be able to?" "She can do much more than we imagine," Natalie interrupts, the passion in her voice stronger than the doubt in her thoughts. "I saw the test she did. Her responses were exceptional. She is intelligent, capable, and, above all, determined. We cannot turn our backs on her just because the world already has." Michael sighs, slowly shakes his head, but in Natalie's eyes, he sees something that makes him reconsider. "All right, let's give her a chance. But you will be responsible for accompanying her." "Thank you, Michael. I promise you won't regret this," says Natalie, a relieved smile appearing on her lips. Back in the waiting room, Hannah adjusts her crutches again, a silent struggle only she knows. Her thoughts revolve around the possibility of yet another rejection. However, when Natalie appears at the door with a smile, something inside Hannah ignites. "Hannah, come with me, please," calls Natalie. Hannah stands up, leaning on her crutches with one hand and firmly holding the strap of her bag with the other. Each step towards Natalie's office is a mix of hope and fear. Inside the office, Natalie closes the door and, with a gentle smile, says, "Hannah, we have good news for you. We've decided to give you an opportunity to work with us. You will start in the cleaning department, and I will be here to help as needed." Natalie's words hit Hannah like a bomb for her persistent sense of defeat. Tears well up in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for believing in me," says Hannah, her voice tremulous but full of renewed determination. Natalie nods, sharing the emotion of the moment. "Welcome to the team, Hannah. Let's prove everyone wrong about you." In the office, bathed in the afternoon sunlight, Natalie Wright sits across from Michael Richardson, the director of XYZ Company. The tension is palpable, a mixture of hope and determination hanging in the air. Natalie, with Hannah Mitchell's papers in front of her, takes a deep breath before beginning her plea. "Michael, I understand our constraints and the usual hiring policy, but I ask that we reconsider Hannah's case," says Natalie, her tone firm and convincing. Michael, with his fingers interlaced and a look of skepticism, peers at Natalie over his glasses. "Natalie, we know she has significant limitations. How do you suggest she fit into the cleaning team with those restrictions?" Natalie smiles, anticipating this question. "I've thought about this. Hannah has shown an incredible capacity to adapt. We can start with tasks that are less physically demanding, and perhaps even adjust some areas to make them more accessible. She is very capable, and I believe her presence can bring a new perspective on inclusion and overcoming challenges to our team." Michael sighs, looking out at the street movement below. "And if this doesn't work?" If it just creates more complications, then we will adjust as necessary. But I believe in her, Michael. She deserves this chance, Natalie reinforces, her gaze loaded with conviction. Finally, Michael nods, surrendering to Natalie's determination. All right, let's give her a chance. We'll start with a trial period. You will be responsible for monitoring her progress and making necessary adjustments. Thank you, Michael. I promise you won't regret this, says Natalie, a smile of relief and victory lighting up her face. The next day, Hannah arrives early, her heart pounding as she crosses the parking lot with her crutches. The sun is still rising, casting long shadows and promises of a new beginning. As she enters the building, she feels the weight of many curious glances. Whispers fill the air, each loaded with judgment and curiosity. Ethan Collins, who works on the same floor, notices Hannah's entrance. His first instinct is protective, noting the looks she attracts. He approaches, extending a hand with a welcoming smile. Hello, you must be Hannah. I'm Ethan. If you need anything, or just want someone to have lunch with, I'm around, he says, his voice gentle and friendly. Hannah, slightly surprised by the direct approach, smiles timidly. Thank you, Ethan. I'm a bit nervous but happy to be here. Hey, everyone here had a first day. It'll be all right. You've met Natalie, right? She spoke very highly of you, Ethan continues, trying to ease the tension. Yes, Natalie and I had a great talk. She seems very kind, replies Hannah, feeling a bit more at ease. Ethan nods and points to the area where Hannah will work. Let's go, I'll show you where it is. And don't worry about the whispers. They always find something to talk about. But here, what really matters is how you do your job. Walking alongside Ethan, Hannah feels a small but significant spark of hope. She is ready to face whatever comes, knowing that, at least for now, she is not alone. As Hannah begins to adapt to her new environment, preparing to face both the challenges of the job and the prejudices of her colleagues, the stage is set for new alliances and confrontations. In Hannah's initial days at XYZ Company, the air is charged with a mix of expectation and tension. She begins her journey determined to prove her worth despite physical barriers and social prejudices. The initial tasks are simple, but each movement is a challenge, and she confronts each one with a resilience that only someone who has lost much could understand. Derek Foster, one of the senior managers known for his relentless ambition, watches Hannah with a look that blends curiosity and disdain. As Hannah carefully maneuvers through the corridors with her crutches, cleaning surfaces and organizing office materials, Derek approaches, his steps resonating with authority. This place isn't for everyone, Derek murmurs, stopping beside Hannah. We have standards here, and I hope you're not thinking we're going to lower them because of you. Hannah, despite the sting of fear, looks up to meet Derek's gaze. With a voice firmer than she feels, she responds, I don't expect anything but a fair chance to show what I can do, sir. Derek smiles, but there is no warmth in his expression. We'll see how long that lasts, he says, before walking away with a low, disdainful laugh. Ethan Collins, who has been observing the interaction from a safe distance, approaches as soon as Derek walks away. With a concerned expression, he places a friendly hand on Hannah's shoulder. Hey, don't let Derek intimidate you. He's like this with all the newcomers. But you have something special. I'll be here, okay? If you need anything, just call me. Hannah smiles, grateful for Ethan's comforting presence. Thank you, Ethan. It's good to know I have a friend here. The following days are a whirlwind of activity. As Hannah strives to adapt and exceed expectations, the whispers continue, some curious, others malicious. Derek never misses an opportunity to hurl cutting remarks whenever he passes by her. On one particularly difficult afternoon, while Hannah is cleaning one of the conference rooms, Derek bursts in abruptly with a group of colleagues. Look here, gentlemen, our new addition. I hope you don't mind the slowness, he says, eliciting laughter from the others. Ethan, passing by the corridor and hearing the comment, can't hold back. He enters the room, his eyes fixed on Derek. "Hey, Derek, how about a little respect?" Ethan challenges, his voice firm and clear. "Hannah is doing her job as well as any of us would." Derek turns, surprised and annoyed by the interruption. His eyes narrow as he stares at Ethan. "Ethan, mind your own business. I don't need you telling me how to manage my team." Ethan doesn't back down, maintaining his steady gaze. "Maybe not, but you certainly need a reminder about basic decency." Derek grumbles something inaudible and leaves the room with his group, casting one last venomous look at Ethan and Hannah. With Derek out of sight, Ethan turns to Hannah, offering an encouraging smile. "Don't worry, he won't bother you while I'm around." Hannah nods, feeling a mix of gratitude and concern. She knows the battle is far from over, but with allies like Ethan by her side, she feels a bit stronger to face the coming days. As Hannah continues her journey, facing the challenges of work and the barriers posed by prejudices, she and Ethan begin to forge a friendship that promises to be key in tackling the adversities that lie ahead. As the days progress, the friendship between Hannah and Ethan strengthens, woven from shared challenges and the small victories of everyday life. In an environment where uncertainty and prejudice lurk in every corridor, they find comfort and strength in each other. On a quiet morning, while organizing the supply closet, Ethan watches Hannah with discreet admiration. "You know, Hannah, your attitude through all this, it's really inspiring. I don't know if I could be as strong," he confesses, wiping a dusty shelf. Hannah smiles, a bit embarrassed by the compliment. "I don't feel strong all the time, Ethan. But having someone who understands, it makes all the difference." Ethan nods, and they continue their work in comfortable silence, broken only by the soft sound of packages being rearranged. Meanwhile, in a room on the other side of the building, Derek Foster convenes a discreet meeting with some of his most trusted colleagues. With the door closed and a cunning look, he outlines his plan to undermine Ethan and Hannah. "We need to be subtle," he instructs, sliding a folder of information across the table. "I want you to start spreading rumors. Nothing too obvious, just whispers about incompetence and, perhaps some doubts about Ethan's integrity." One of the colleagues, a woman with a calculating expression, raises an eyebrow. "And what about Hannah? She's starting to gain sympathy here." Derek smiles, a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Just reinforce that she's a liability. After all, who would be crazy enough to trust someone so fragile?" Back in the less gloomy reality of the supply closet, Ethan shares an idea with Hannah. "You know, we could try to organize a small event here. Nothing grand, just a breakfast, so people can get to know you better. What do you think?" Hannah considers, the idea bringing a glimmer of hope to her eyes. "I would love that, Ethan. Maybe, if people could see me beyond the crutches, they might start to understand. Then it's settled." "I'll talk to Natalie about it," Ethan responds, excited about the plan. In the following days, as Ethan organizes the event, the atmosphere in the office begins to change. The whispers from Derek and his team spread like a subtle mist, tainting perceptions and fostering doubts. But at the same time, the news of the breakfast spreads, generating a murmur of curiosity and anticipation. Hannah notices the looks, some filled with suspicion, others with genuine interest. She clings to the hope that the event can turn the tide in her favor, becoming a crucial turning point in her journey. As the breakfast event approaches, Derek Foster intensifies his efforts to destabilize Hannah and Ethan. On a cold, cloudy morning, Derek meets with one of the company's IT technicians in a secluded room, where conversations can remain confidential. "Listen, I need you to do something for me," Derek says in a low tone, passing a USB drive to the technician. "This drive contains sensitive company information. I want it to appear on Ethan's computer. Then, make sure it's discovered during a routine check." The technician, a young man with a nervous expression, hesitates, looking at the USB drive in his hand. "Derek, this is serious. If someone finds out..." "They won't find out," Derek interrupts, with a confident smile. "And if all goes well, there'll be a nice bonus for you." With the conspiracy in motion, the technician reluctantly carries out his part, inserting the USB drive into Ethan's computer during a moment of distraction. The compromising information is transferred, and he leaves as discreetly as he entered. The next day, Chris Turner, the head of internal security, receives an anonymous tip about a possible security breach. Seriously, he summons his team. "We have a potential information leak. I need everyone to be alert and review all systems." The investigation begins immediately, and it doesn't take long before they discover the file on Ethan's computer. Chris, with a folder of evidence in hand, heads to Ethan's office, his face marked by lines of concern. "Ethan, I need to talk to you." "In private," says Chris, entering Ethan's office. Ethan, surprised and somewhat alarmed, follows Chris to a conference room. "What's going on, Chris?" Ethan asks, feeling a knot form in his stomach. Chris places the folder on the table and explains the situation. "We found these documents on your computer. They are very sensitive and were hidden in a concealed directory. Can you explain this?" Ethan, completely stunned, flips through the documents with trembling hands. I've never seen these files before, Chris. I swear. Someone must have put this on my computer." Chris nods, his analytical gaze not diminishing. "I understand your position, Ethan. But you must understand that I need to investigate this thoroughly. Your cooperation will be crucial." As Ethan struggles to process the accusation, Hannah and Natalie become his only allies. Hannah, upon hearing about the situation, rushes to find Ethan, finding him pale and shaken after the interrogation. "Ethan, this is crazy. You wouldn't do something like this," Hannah says, holding his hands in a gesture of support. Ethan, his voice laden with concern, responds, "I know, Hannah, but someone is trying to frame me, and I don't know how to prove my innocence." Natalie, joining them, her expression serious and determined, adds, "We'll find out who's behind this, Ethan. We won't let them do this to you." The tension in the office grows as Chris's investigation progresses. Rumors and suspicions begin to affect the morale of the team, and Ethan's situation appears increasingly precarious. With the conspiracy taking shape, Ethan, Hannah, and Natalie prepare to face the adversities, joining forces in a desperate attempt to uncover the truth and clear Ethan's name. In the heart of the crisis, Hannah becomes a reluctant detective. With each passing day, she observes the movements around the office more closely, noting discrepancies and unusual patterns. Natalie, in turn, uses her access to administrative records to aid the makeshift investigation. They meet in a small cafe near work, a location now regular for their clandestine meetings. "Hannah, look what I found," Natalie whispers, sliding some papers across the table towards Hannah. "These are the access records from last week. Derek has been in areas where he had no business being at very suspicious times." Hannah, examining the documents with keen eyes, murmurs, "This doesn't make sense for his job. Why would he be in the IT department or even in the financial records warehouse?" Natalie takes a sip of her coffee, thoughtful. "Exactly my question. And there's more. He seems to have accessed some of our most sensitive data systems. We need more proof, but this is a start." Inspired by a sudden idea, Hannah proposes, "What if we could talk to someone from IT? Maybe they can tell us if he was doing something specific on those computers." With a plan in mind, the two return to the office, where Hannah approaches a young IT technician she knows to be friendly and discreet. "James, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asks when she finds him alone in the print room. James, somewhat surprised, nods. "Of course, Hannah. What's going on?" Hannah, lowering her voice, explains, "It's about Derek. Natalie and I have noticed some odd behavior. Could you help us understand what he was doing on the computers in restricted areas?" James looks around nervously before responding. I really shouldn't talk about this, but Derek asked me to do a backup a few days ago. It was a strange request, out of the normal protocol. He wanted copies of certain financial files. Hannah and Natalie exchanged significant looks. Do you know exactly which files? Asks Natalie. Something about recent transactions and contracts. I have the records of the request, but it could put me in a difficult situation, James admits, clearly worried about the implications. We understand, James. Anything you can do to help, without putting yourself at risk, we appreciate, Hannah says, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. With this new information, Hannah and Natalie feel closer to understanding what Derek might be planning. They decide they need concrete proof to expose his actions without putting James or anyone else at risk. Let's set a trap, Natalie suggests with a glint of determination in her eyes. If Derek is trying to manipulate the financial data, he'll have to access those files again. We can catch him in the act. Hannah agrees, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. Yes, let's do this. It's time for Derek to stop using the company for his dirty games. They spend the next few days carefully planning, adjusting the security cameras, and preparing the system to alert them as soon as Derek tries to access the files. With everything in place, they wait, knowing that at any moment the trap could be triggered. With the plan meticulously prepared, Hannah and Natalie wait for the right moment to execute the trap that could finally expose Derek. The atmosphere in the office is tense, but they maintain a facade of normality, their hearts racing with each of Derek's movements. On a gray morning, as Derek walks through the corridors with his usual confident posture, he heads to the computer where the compromising files have been prepared. Not noticing the discreet camera that Natalie had installed, he enters his password and begins to access the documents. Hannah, in a nearby office, receives a notification on her phone, alert that Derek is in the system. She whispers to Natalie, who is at her side, "It's now. Let's record everything." Natalie activates the recording device while Hannah watches Derek's actions live on her phone screen. They see him copying files to a USB drive, clearly violating company policies. Knowing they need more than just images, Hannah decides to confront Derek directly. She approaches him with a hidden recorder, taking a deep breath to control her nervousness. "Derek," Hannah calls out, her voice firm despite her anxiety. Derek turns, clearly surprised. "Hannah, what are you doing here so early?" She looks him straight in the eyes, her determination clear in her expression. "I know what you've done, Derek. Manipulating evidence against Ethan, trying to discredit me." "Why?" For a moment, Derek seems to hesitate, but then, perhaps out of arrogance or thinking he can manipulate her, he smirks cynically. "Hannah, do you really think someone like you could understand business? This place is a game, and I play to win. Ethan was in the way. And you? Well, you were just a useful piece." Every word is recorded, Derek's confession captured by the hidden device. Hannah feels a mix of horror and victory. "You won't get away with this, Derek. All of this is being recorded." Derek pales, realizing his mistake too late. "You can't prove anything," he stammers, trying to regain his composure. Hannah doesn't respond. She turns and quickly walks away, finding Natalie waiting anxiously. Together, they rush to the office of Chris Turner, the head of internal security. Chris greets them, his expression serious as he sees their urgency. "What happened?" he asks. Hannah hands over the recording to Chris, briefly explaining. "We recorded Derek confessing everything. He manipulated the evidence against Ethan and planned to discredit me from the start." Chris listens to the recording with growing attention, his expression becoming ever more grave. As soon as the recording ends, he stands up, resolved. "This is serious. I'll take action immediately." With the recording in hand and Derek's confirmation of his illicit actions, Chris prepares to take the necessary steps. He calls an urgent meeting with the senior management, ready to expose the truth about Derek. Following the shocking revelation of Derek's actions, The XYZ Corporation office becomes the setting for an intense board meeting. Chris Turner, armed with the explosive recording provided by Hannah, presents the case against Derek with palpable gravity. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a direct violation of our policies on ethics and integrity," Chris begins, as he plays the recording. Derek's voice, arrogant and convinced, fills the room, leaving the board members visibly disturbed. Derek, summoned to the meeting, stands, his face a mask of control that slowly begins to fail. "This was taken out of context," he tries to argue, but his voice wavers under the weight of the evidence. The CEO, a man with an austere posture and piercing gaze, raises his hand, silencing Derek. "There is no context that justifies your actions, Derek. Manipulation of evidence, conspiracy against colleagues. This is unacceptable. You are dismissed, effective immediately." Derek tries to protest, but security guards already approach, indicating the door. With one last defiant look, he is escorted out, his career at XYZ ending not with triumph, but with total disgrace. Meanwhile, Ethan, who had been unjustly accused, is called to a separate meeting with Chris and some HR team members. "Ethan, we would like to offer our sincere apologies for what happened," Chris says, extending his hand. "The charges against you have been completely withdrawn. We are committed to repairing any damage to your reputation." Ethan, relieved and somewhat shaken, nods. "I appreciate that, Chris. I just want to put all this behind and move forward." The truth about the systematic bullying that Hannah faced also comes to light. Several involved employees are identified and dismissed, with the company promising to review its policies and strengthen training on inclusion and respect in the workplace. Natalie, working alongside Hannah, initiates a series of workshops and awareness sessions. "It's time to change our culture," she declares in a session packed with employees. "Each of us has a role in creating a workplace where everyone feels safe and valued." Hannah, now seen not just as a victim but as a catalyst for positive change, actively participates in these sessions, sharing her story and helping to shape the new initiatives. The company slowly begins to transform, adopting a more open and inclusive stance. The changes are not immediate, but the commitment to improvement is clear and palpable. Employees start to feel a new sense of community and responsibility, encouraged by the actions taken against Derek and his accomplices. As the dust from the recent scandals began to settle at XYZ Corporation, Hannah and Ethan found in each other a new and comforting closeness. The challenges they faced together had brought them closer in a way neither had anticipated. On a Friday afternoon, after a particularly productive day, they decided to celebrate with coffee at a small bistro near work. "You know, Hannah," Ethan began, stirring his coffee, a small smile forming on his lips, "I really didn't know what to expect when all this started. But I'm really glad we found each other through everything." Holding the cup between her hands, Hannah returned the smile. "Me too. I don't think I could have gotten through all this without you by my side. You made the days easier." As the days went by, their friendship deepened into something more meaningful. Prolonged exchanges of glances and conversations that stretched for hours after work were frequent. Both felt grateful not only for having each other for support, but also for the chance to explore a new chapter in their personal lives. However, the serenity they began to enjoy was abruptly interrupted. One morning, Hannah found an anonymous letter on her desk when she arrived at work. Her heart sank as she read the cold, threatening words cut out from magazines and newspapers. "You think everything is resolved, but it's just beginning." Trembling, Hannah showed the letter to Ethan, who immediately furrowed his brow in concern. "This is disturbing," he said, examining the letter. "You should take this to Chris immediately. We need to find out who is behind this." Together, they headed to Chris's office, who listened attentively as Hannah explained how she found the letter. "This is extremely serious," Chris stated, taking the letter with a somber expression. "We'll increase security around the building and start monitoring all entries and exits. We're not taking any risks." Despite the enhanced security measures, The content of the letters began to escalate, each one more threatening than the last. With each new message, the tension between Hannah and Ethan grew, not because of any distance between them, but because of their mutual concern for Hannah's safety. Hannah began to look over her shoulder with every step she took, her sense of security deeply shaken. Ethan became even more protective, insisting on accompanying her to and from work every day. As the weeks unfolded, the anonymous letters not only continued to arrive but grew in frequency and intensity. Each new message seemed more sinister, with veiled threats becoming openly hostile. "You can't hide forever, and the price will be paid," were recurring phrases, each sent with careless handwriting that denoted haste and anger. Ethan, increasingly concerned, insisted that Hannah not take the threats lightly. "Hannah, this is getting too serious. We need to consider involving the police again," he said as they reviewed yet another disturbing letter one quiet afternoon in his apartment. Hannah, feeling a mix of anger and fear, nodded in agreement. "I know, Ethan. I just don't understand who would do this, or why. It seems we won't have peace." The authorities were notified again, and a more thorough investigation was initiated. However, before any significant advances could be made, the unimaginable happened. Ethan, returning from an external meeting, was approached by an unknown individual. Witnesses later described a hooded man who approached him in the company parking lot. Hannah was at work when she received the call. "Miss Mitchell, this is Central Hospital. A man named Ethan Collins has been admitted after an attack. He is in serious condition and has asked to contact you immediately," informed the calm voice on the other end of the line. Hannah's world spun. Dropping everything, she rushed to the hospital, her mind unable to fully accept the reality of the words she had just heard. Upon arrival, she was directed to the emergency room, where she found Ethan unconscious, surrounded by various bandages and monitoring equipment. The attending doctor approached, offering a grim handshake. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Dr. Hayes. Ethan has been injured but is now stable. He took a blow to the head and has several contusions, but we expect a full recovery." "He was lucky." Hannah, feeling a mix of relief and fury, stayed by Ethan's side, holding his hand. "Who would do this? Why?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone in particular. As Ethan slowly began to regain consciousness, Hannah's concern transformed into determination. "We're going to find who did this, Ethan. I promise," she murmured, as he weakly squeezed her hand in response. With Ethan in the hospital and the assault clearly linked to the threats they had been receiving, the tension between Hannah and the unknown assailant reached new heights. She knew she needed to act, not just to protect herself, but also to ensure that Ethan would never be targeted by such violence again. In the days following the attack on Ethan, Hannah found herself in a state of constant alert, driven by a mix of fear and fierce determination. She knew that the only way to protect both herself and Ethan was to find out who was behind the threats and the assault. With this in mind, she sought out Chris and Michael, trusting that their experience and resources at the company could help set up an effective trap. In a tense meeting in the company's security room, with monitors displaying different angles of the building, Hannah outlined her plan. "We need to make him think we're still vulnerable, perhaps even more than before," explained Hannah, her eyes fixed on the serious faces of Chris and Michael. Chris, the head of security, nodded, understanding the logic behind the suggestion. "Do you have a specific idea in mind for how you want to do this?" Hannah took a deep breath before responding, "Yes. We can use the company's email system to send a fake message. Something that suggests Ethan is getting out of the hospital earlier and that we'll be alone in the office to discuss our next step. If the assailant is watching, this might lure him in." Michael, the director, sketched a half-smile. "It's cunning and risky, but it makes sense. I can ensure that security is ready to intervene the moment we detect any suspicious activity." With the plan set, they proceeded quickly. A meticulously drafted email was sent from an account that appeared to be Ethan's, detailing the supposed time of his arrival and the need for an urgent meeting at the office late at night. Meanwhile, Chris organized a team of undercover security to strategically position themselves around the building, ready to capture the assailant. On the designated night, Hannah arrived at the office, her heart racing as every shadow seemed suspicious. Chris was in constant communication with her through a small earpiece, ensuring she was not alone. "Ethan isn't really coming, right?" Hannah confirmed once more, her voice low. "Correct, Hannah. It's just part of the plan." "Ethan is safe," Chris confirmed calmly, monitoring the security cameras covering each entrance. Hannah sat at her desk, turning on the light only in her cubicle, creating the illusion that she was working late as promised. As the minutes dragged on, every sound made her shudder, but she remained focused, knowing any mistake could be costly. Finally, the figure of a man appeared on the security cameras, cautiously approaching the building. "We have a possible suspect approaching from the east side," one of the voices informed through the communicator, the tension evident in every word. Hannah prepared herself, her hands trembling slightly as she clung to the courage needed to face what was to come. The trap was ready, and she was the bait. The atmosphere in the office was electrically charged as Hannah waited in the darkness, her desk lit only by a solitary lamp. The sound of muffled footsteps echoed through the silent corridor, drawing closer and closer. Chris, through the earpiece, whispered an update. "He's entering now. Remember, just hold him until we get there." The figure that stepped into the light was unmistakably familiar to Hannah, a former colleague named Mark, whose resentment towards Derek had been known but whose alliance with him had remained hidden. His eyes met Hannah's, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "Mark," Hannah spoke, her voice firm despite the adrenaline tremor. "Why are you doing this?" Mark stopped, a twisted expression of anger and despair crossing his face. "You think you know what's fair? Derek promised we'd rise together. But he was taken down, and now all of you will pay." Hannah remained calm, watching Mark's movements as he spoke. "Derek used you, Mark. He used all of us. That doesn't give you the right to threaten people." Mark laughed bitterly. "Derek might have started this, but I will finish it. You destroyed my life when you exposed him. Now it's my turn." Before he could continue, the security team, alerted by Chris, rushed in. Mark tried to react, but was quickly restrained and handcuffed. The police, who had been pre-warned and were on standby, entered to take custody. As the police led Mark away, he shouted, promising that the fight was not over. Hannah watched, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. She had hoped that exposing the truth might bring peace, but reality proved to be more complex. Chris approached Hannah, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. Hannah sighed, looking down the now empty corridor. "Yes, I'm okay. But this makes me wonder how many others are out there hurt and thinking that revenge is the answer." "Justice sometimes leaves scars," Chris agreed. "But you did the right thing, Hannah. And we will always do what's necessary to ensure that justice prevails." With Mark arrested and the immediate danger neutralized, the office slowly began to return to normal. However, the impact of the events left an indelible mark on Hannah, who knew that the real battles might still be to come. She felt strengthened, however, by the support network she had and the certainty that she would not face the future alone. Now, with the threat from Mark resolved, Hannah began to contemplate the next steps for herself and the company, pondering the changes necessary to prevent such incidents from recurring. The days that followed were a mix of tension and relief for Hannah. As Ethan continued his recovery in the hospital, she spent hours by his bed, holding his hand and talking about plans for the future, interspersed with periods of comfortable silence. Adversity had strengthened the bond between them, turning a friendship forged in challenges into something deeper and more enduring. "You know," Ethan began one day, looking at Hannah with an expression of gratitude, "I never thought something so horrible could bring about something so good. I feel like I've found something real with you, despite everything." Hannah smiled, squeezing Ethan's hand. "I feel the same. It's strange to think that without all this, we might never have gotten to this point." As Ethan gained strength and his discharge date approached, the company organized a ceremony to recognize Hannah's courage and determination. In the company's large auditorium, colleagues, executives, and the media gathered for an event that celebrated not just survival but also human resilience. Michael, the director, took the stage to deliver the opening speech. Today, we are here not only to recognize the courage of an incredible young woman, but also to reaffirm our commitment to the safety and well-being of all our employees, he announced, gesturing for Hannah to join him on stage. With warm applause echoing through the space, Hannah ascended the stage, her heart beating with a mix of nervousness and pride. "When I joined XYZ Corporation," she began, her voice firm despite the trembling microphone in her hands, "I was looking for a place to make a difference, a place that would challenge me. But I never imagined I would face the challenges I encountered. However, through these challenges, I discovered a strength I did not know I had and a sense of community that is truly the backbone of this company." At the end of her speech, the room erupted in applause once more, many moved by her strength and eloquence. It was a moment of validation for Hannah, a confirmation that her struggle had not been in vain. In the days following, as Ethan was finally discharged and returned home, normality began to reinstall in their lives. Together, they discussed how they could use their experience to help the company create more robust policies against violence and harassment, ensuring that no one else went through what they had faced. Ethan, now at home and continuing his recovery, found comfort and motivation in his partnership with Hannah. "Let's do this together," he told her one afternoon as they planned their next meeting with the HR team. "We have the chance to make a real difference here." Hannah nodded, feeling empowered by the partnership and Ethan's support. "Yes, let's do this. Not just for us, but for everyone at XYZ." With Ethan by her side, and with the recognition and support of the company, Hannah felt ready to face the next challenges. And as they prepared to work on improving the company's policies. After months of recovery and hard work to improve corporate culture, Hannah found herself on the threshold of a significant change in her career. The day of her promotion arrived almost as a coronation of her achievements and the challenges she had overcome. In a special meeting convened by the board, she was officially promoted to director of the cleaning team, a position that now included expanded responsibilities to lead initiatives on inclusion and diversity within the company. Michael, the director, announced the promotion with visible enthusiasm in front of a room full of executives and employees. "Hannah has shown exceptional strength and dedication," he began, looking at her with a mix of admiration and respect. "Her ability to overcome adversity and use these experiences to drive positive change is not only commendable, it's inspiring. It is an honor to announce that Hannah will be our new director of the cleaning team, with a special focus on leading our inclusion initiatives." Standing next to Michael, Hannah felt her heart beating with a mix of nervousness and pride. "Thank you, Michael, and to all of you," she said, addressing the room. "This promotion is much more than a step forward in my career. It is a testament that change is possible when we commit to justice and mutual respect. I am more committed than ever to ensuring that our company is a place where everyone can feel safe and valued." In the following months, Hannah worked tirelessly to implement stricter policies against bullying and discrimination. Along with the HR team, she developed new mandatory training for all employees, focused on awareness of diversity, inclusion, and respectful communication in the workplace. "Let's make these trainings not just a formality, but an integral part of how we operate daily," Hannah explained during a training session, where she actively interacted with employees, listening to their concerns and suggesting practical solutions. The impact of the changes implemented by Hannah began to be felt throughout the company. Complaint rates related to harassment significantly decreased, and the overall morale of employees improved. Success stories and positive feedback from various departments began to circulate, reinforcing the value of the new policies. Ethan, always by Hannah's side, supported each new initiative. "You are making a real difference, Hannah. I'm so proud," he told her after a meeting where several of her proposals were approved. Hannah smiled, grateful for the constant support. "We're doing this together. It's a team effort." As the chapter of her ascension closed, Hannah not only established herself as an influential leader within the company, but also as a powerful voice for positive cultural change. With the promise of new challenges and opportunities on the horizon, she was ready to continue her work, ensuring that justice and equality were not just words, but visible and lasting actions at XYZ Corporation. As the sun set with a golden glow, spreading warm light through Susan's modest room, Hannah sat beside her aunt, holding her wrinkled hand affectionately. Susan, now comfortably settled in a small but cozy house thanks to Hannah's financial support, smiled with a mix of pride and admiration as she listened to her niece's latest achievements. "Hannah, I always knew you would do great things," Susan said, her eyes sparkling with tears of joy. "But hearing about all that you've overcome, all the battles you've fought, it's truly inspiring." Hannah smiled, squeezing her aunt's hand. "I couldn't have done it without your love and support, Aunt Susan. Every difficult step, every decision, you were always with me in my heart." As they shared a peaceful afternoon, reminiscing about the challenges and celebrating the victories, their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. Ethan, who had come with Hannah, entered with a shy smile, holding a folder. "Hannah, sorry to interrupt," he began, "but I think you'll want to see this now." Curious, Hannah opened the folder. Inside, there were documents that Ethan and she had prepared as part of their proposal for a new workplace wellness program, designed to help employees deal with stress and anxiety. But alongside the documents, there was a new letter, this time not a threat, but an offer from a major international conference on workplace well-being for Hannah to be the keynote speaker. "This is incredible, Ethan. When did this happen?" Hannah asked, genuine emotion coloring her voice. "I just received the confirmation," Ethan explained, clearly excited. "They've heard about the impact of your work and want you to share your story and strategies with the world." Susan watched, an expression of admiration on her face. "Hannah, my dear, you're changing the world, one good deed at a time. I couldn't be prouder." The three toasted to the news with tea and laughter, planning for the future. With every opportunity that arose, Hannah and Ethan saw a horizon filled with possibilities, not just for themselves but for positively impacting the lives of many others. And, as the day turned into night, a feeling of fulfillment filled the room. The struggles they had faced together had prepared them for a future not just of success, but of meaning and purpose. Hannah's story, laden with challenges, triumphs, and an unrelenting pursuit of justice, touched everyone who knew her and many who only heard of her. With an ending that promised new beginnings and future adventures, readers could feel that, although one page was being turned, another exciting chapter was just beginning for Hannah and Ethan.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sarah tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sarah y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sarah quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber, los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes. Te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Dicen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Dicen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el 3er piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al 7º piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos dos objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche. Me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado. Dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Joss me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Joss y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales, 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco, parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas, había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos, Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Joss casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche, no había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta, los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse, no hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sarah hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sarah no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marshen no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Joss en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sarah. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sarah era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Sherry. Sherry alquilaba una habitación de Sara. Cada centavo que Sara ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Sherry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sara no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Sherry explicó que Sara estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Sherry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Sherry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foote resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.